Hey, I'm Jeff and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the main differences between spraying down your moss pool versus using the water bottle drip method. Now, one method isn't necessarily better than the other. It's basically just whatever works for you. Now, this is going to be more of a beginner type video, I guess. If you're just looking for information on how to water your moss pool, then this video is for you, so let's check it out. Regardless of the method that you choose for your moss pools, the key point to this entire video is just making sure that you thoroughly water it from top to bottom and making sure that there's no dry areas. I use this kind just because I find that it stays a little bit more damp or moist compared to those DIY round ones, so this is what I use. There are three sizes. This is the small, there is a medium, and then a large. Now, if you're using the drip water bottle method, it's probably not a good idea on these little ones because the bottle is pretty much larger than the moss pool itself. So if you put the bottle on top, it's probably going to be catastrophic. For these little ones, I use the spray bottle method. But when it comes to the medium and even the large, either the spray or water bottle method will work fine. This is my beautiful Monstera mint, and I just noticed that this leaf is a little discolored, so I'm gonna have to spray it down with an insecticidal soap afterwards. But the first thing is determining whether the moss pool needs to be watered or not. So the first thing I like to check is the soil, making sure that's dry. If you have a pot that is quite large, the bamboo skewer method is a good way to determine if the soil is dry or moist. So basically you push that down into the bottom of the pot, let it sit there for a minute. When you pull it out, if you're seeing any moisture or soil sticking to the wood, then it is damp and it doesn't need to be watered. This one is absolutely bone dry. Now for the moss pool itself, I like to give this the little crunch test. I'm going to try and get in nice and close so you can hear it. It is crunchy and crispy. So this moss, you can just by feeling it, you can feel that it's dry. The pot is light and the soil is dry. So this one is definitely needing to be watered. It's probably should have got water a few days ago. But for the spray method, one of the downsides, if you're just spraying down the moss pool like this, a lot of times there can be quite a bit of overspray. You can see there's just water flowing all over the place. If you're just watering the front of the moss pool, sometimes it can be dry at the back. So you can see pretty much no water has saturated through to the back. Now when I'm dealing with these smaller moss pools or even the larger varieties, I always put my spray wand at the top here as well. Now, it's easy for these small ones because it doesn't take a lot of time, but if you're dealing with the medium or even the large varieties, I don't want to be standing here soaking the moss for like 5 minutes. So that's where the water bottle method is a good choice if you have the larger varieties, but I'm just putting the spray wand at the top, making sure that all of the moss is thoroughly saturated. You can see it's starting to come down the back. It's definitely dripping out the bottom, but you can see there are still some areas where it's dry, but it's definitely better than just soaking the front of the moss pool. So I'm just gonna give it a bit more water, just let that soak in and let it soak down into the pot. If you find the soil is still dry, then you can spray the soil as well. Now after spraying the plant down, I'm just looking it over. The moss pool is like 95% saturated. The pot is much heavier and as you saw, there was water dripping out the bottom. Now one of the questions as well, when you have a plant on a moss pool, is the issue with overwatering. You shouldn't have an issue with overwatering or getting root rot if your plant is in the appropriate soil. So you want to make sure that it's in a nice chunky mixture like this, which provides airflow to the roots. When you get root rot, it basically means that your plant isn't drying out fast enough. Those roots aren't getting any airflow or oxygen, and they're basically rotting. So if you have the plant, or if you have a plant in the appropriate soil, then you can water it as much as you want during that watering session, and you shouldn't have an issue with root rot. If it's staying wet for too long and not drying out, that's when you get into the root rot issues. I should also mention that when you have a smaller plant like this, there is not a large amount of stem touching the moss pole, so there's probably not going to be a lot of the roots going into the moss so far. So getting the entire moss pole completely saturated isn't as important if you have a more like established plant. Well, this is not a very good example, but it's one that I had closest by. You can see it's got a bit of a larger stem up against the moss pole there. So it's not important to entirely saturate the moss, but this just keeps it hydrated and retains moisture for longer. So making sure this one is thoroughly saturated from top to bottom is probably more important than this one, which just has a little section of stem. You want to entice those roots to grow into the moss, and the moss is an extension of the growing medium, so it obtains moisture and nutrients not only from the soil but from the moss. And that's the concept for these moss poles, is to get the plant to grow roots and grow vertically on the moss pole to get larger leaves over time. I'm going to use this philodendron as an example. Oop, getting caught on my alocasia there. One of the reasons why I like using the spray method is because I actually have a garden hose in my basement, and I like to take my plants over to the shower to not only thoroughly water the moss pole as well as the soil, but to clean the leaves off of dust and debris, just so it can properly photosynthesize, but it also helps with pest management. It'll blast off any sort of spider mites, thrips, and that sort of thing. It can just help manage the pest situation better. And this little plant, this little monstera here, with the discoloration on the leaf as well as the stem, leads me to believe that this might have a thrip issue. So I did take it over, spray it down with an insecticidal soap, and yeah, I sprayed it off with water there first, but it can be a good way to deter pests as well as cleaning off the leaves. Now I'm going to show you how to set up a water bottle system, and you're probably thinking, well, it's easy, just drill some holes on the top, flip it upside down and put it on the moss pole. Well, I ran into a couple issues which I'll show here. When you flip it upside down, it'll start to drip a little bit like that, but you can see it quickly stops. There is no dripping. There's no air bubbles coming up the water bottle. It is not draining. There is still no dripping. So what I did with this water bottle is, when it's inverted like this, I actually poked a hole at the top here, and I'll show you here in a second. I'll fill it up, and basically it was just out of control. It just started flowing out the bottom here like a faucet. So this one, I popped a hole in the top, and it needs a way to expel air. And when I let go of the bottom there, it just starts free flowing. Now that is what you don't want, because you're going to get a big mess when it's on the moss pole. It's just going to kind of drip down really fast. What you want is a very slow trickle into the moss, so it's going to be filling up this moss pole quickly. So I'll show you the trick with this bottle here. It's got 3 holes on the top, nothing on the bottom, and I'll show you how to get it to free flow without actually poking a hole on the top and just letting it gush out. So the reason why it's not flowing is because there is no moss right to the top. So I'm going to add in some moss, and basically the idea is you need the cap to come in contact with the moss, and that basically breaks the seal. There's like a little water seal when you flip it upside down. The moss, when in contact with the holes or the cap here, will wick the water out. So you just make like a little hole in the top, and then you can flip it upside down and just place it in there like that, and you can see it's bubbling. So now it is slowly draining into the moss without, a ton of water leaking out this side. You can see it dripping down here. So just rest it on the top there, making sure it's in contact with the moss, and then it just kind of wicks it up. Let's flip it around here and check out the back here as well. You can see the moss is receiving water down the bottom, or from the top to the bottom, as well as the back there. So you can see it's it's draining. So I don't know, it might take 5-10 minutes kind of thing, but at least it's not just absolutely gushing out the bottom of the cap there like the other methods. So this is an easy way to water the moss pole if you have a medium to larger size. It's a little bit of a trial and error determining like how large of a water bottle you need. This one's been going for probably about 2-3 minutes now, and you can see it's pretty well reached the bottom of the moss pole here. And I'm just going to flip it over or turn it around. There's still a bit in the bottle. Looks like it's coating the back of the moss pole here as well, and I can feel that the soil is saturated as well. So probably just this little, I don't even know how many mils it is. This is a little 500 ml bottle, and that's probably the correct size for this plant. I know there might be difference of opinion out there, different methods, larger bottles, that sort of thing, but it looks like it's coated it pretty good in about 4 or 5 minutes. I'm just gonna take this off now that it's done, and I'm just gonna feel the weight of the pot. It was sitting in the container there, but yeah, I'd say this is probably a good amount of water, just a little 500 ml water bottle for this plant. Still a little bit dry at the back, but overall, I think it's a good amount of water just from these little 500 ml water bottles. When I first started with moss poles, there's plenty of information out there on YouTube and the internet with people saying, you know, you need to keep it moist at all times, but then that leads to not only the moss remaining wet, but a lot of times the soil will remain quite saturated, I guess you can say. And there's lots of questions out there asking, how do you keep your moss pole well watered or moist and the soil dry? So in my experience, or for the way I care for my plants, I don't keep the moss pole saturated all the time. Now, I watered this probably a few days ago, maybe 3 or 4 days ago. You can see there's a little bit of dampness to the moss at the bottom here, but as you travel up to the top of the plant, it's crispy. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's crunchy, it's dry. So this is how it will, or this is the process of the moss pole, is it typically dries from the top to the bottom. Now, I probably won't water this one for another couple days until the moss, like down here, is a little bit more dry. And I'm gonna be feeling the soil here as well. I just repotted this one, and the soil was absolutely saturated, I think 2 days ago, so I didn't re-water once I placed it in a larger pot. So I'm just gonna leave it for about another day or two. It should dry out, but that's typically how I determine when my moss poles need water, is checking the top, crunchy, and the bottom. You don't want it to be like super dry, but this is still quite moist or damp down here. So I don't keep it completely saturated or moist the entire time is what I'm trying to say, because you can't keep the moss pole wet and the soil dry. That's not realistic, and you're going to lead to that root rot issues. The soil is going to stay wet for too long. So just pay attention to not only the top of the moss pole, but the bottom and the soil. Once they are, I would say, like 95% dry, then water again from the top all the way to the bottom, and then let it come out the bottom of the drain hole, making sure that the soil is well watered as well. So hopefully that makes sense. Another thing to consider when setting up a moss pole is how you actually pack it. Now, this was kind of brought to my attention by Jake the Plant Guy, saying pack the moss more so it's more dense. And the reason for that, without him saying it, it just makes common sense, is that when you have moss that is more compact, it's going to stay wet or it's going to stay moist for longer. If it's very light and fluffy, it's going to dry out much faster. So if you're finding your moss is drying out too fast, then just take a pencil, whatever, and just pack it down so that it is nice and compact. That way it retains and holds moisture for longer. So I think the last thing I'm going to talk about is fertilizing. This is what I use. It's the Foliage Pro. It's now Super Thrive. I cannot find this anywhere, and I'm down to the last like maybe half a container. So I'm trying to conserve this until I can find another source. But I know there's many people out there that use the moss poles and water bottle method that use fertilizer or a nutrient-rich solution for each watering. Now, I've been trying to, like I said, cut back on it, so I've been doing every other watering with the nutrient solution. So it's the same thing. You just follow the directions on the back of the container. I like to pre-mix mine in a 40-liter jug, and then you can fill up your water bottle and then place it on top like that, and then just let it kind of drip down. And that way the moss as well as the soil will obtain nutrients from the watering. So this one doesn't have any water, it's just a plain water bottle. But this right here, this moss, you can't hear any crunching. It's still fairly squishy. It's not extremely damp. I can still feel a little bit of moisture on this. So I would probably give this one maybe like another day or so. And the soil, I can still feel a little bit of moisture in there as well. So I would give this one probably about another day or so before I stick the water bottle back on top. But let's use the bamboo skewer method. Push it right to the bottom and then pull it out. And you can see there's some soil just at the maybe bottom third of the stick, even up to here a little bit. So the bottom of the soil is still pretty damp. So yeah, this one not quite ready yet. So that's kind of how I tell when to water my plants. And the weight of the pot, it still has some pretty good weight to it. It's not light and airy. So I hope this video helped you better understand moss poles. And again, I'm not an expert with these. I've had them for probably maybe a year or more. I'm still learning from them all the time. But for me, and if you watch this channel, I'm probably more of an underwater just because I like to use terracotta. So yeah, mine typically get pretty crispy and a lot of times will lose its lower leaves. So I'm still trying to troubleshoot as well. Like I said, I'm not an expert, but I just kind of learn as I go. Hopefully you found this video helpful and useful with some little hints to better help you care for your plants. So that's going to be pretty much it for this video. If you have any other comments or questions, please leave it down below in the comment section. Thanks for watching. And I will say, today I reached the 100,000 subscribers on YouTube, so I can't thank you guys enough. I've been pretty much speechless all day just due to reaching that milestone. So thank you so much. Appreciate the support. Take care, everyone. Bye.